This is the wild world of sports where we relive the successes, failures, and major events in sports history. I'm Lucas Larson, and today we start up our DeLorean to visit 1990. 1990 was filled with many notable events as NASA launched the Hubble Space Telescope and the first episode of The Simpsons aired on Fox. The world changed forever when Tim Berners-Lee published his proposal for a new dancing app. I'm just kidding. It was actually a proposal for the World Wide Web, a new document sharing system. These major events were wild, but were they as wild as the world of sports? Let's put on our pads and get to the NFL. Ironically, the 1990 playoffs started on New Year's Eve in 1989. Come on, Paul Tagliabue, let the players party. Speaking of Paul Tagliabue, he took over for Pete Rozelle as NFL commissioner just a few months before the 1989 season. A six-member search committee was formed to find candidates to fill the job, and although the committee chairman Wellington Mara said they would present multiple candidates for consideration, the committee unanimously endorsed Saints general manager and minority owner Jim Finks. Finks ran unopposed for the job, but a group of 11 owners said, "Nah, son," and straight up didn't vote, which prevented Finks from getting the 19 necessary votes to become commissioner. They felt that they didn't have enough of a voice in the selection process and wanted more information on the committee's search process. To top this all off, Finks and the committee were undergoing contract negotiations before Finks was even elected. A second committee placed votes, which resulted in an even 13 votes for Finks and Tagliabue. The NFL loves committees, so a third committee consisting of 5 owners was formed, which ultimately resulted in a unanimous vote to elect Tagliabue as commissioner and Finks as president of football operations. Finks declined the position, and Paul T. proceeded as commissioner for the 1989-90 season. The season started welcoming 5 rookies: Barry Sanders, Troy Aikman, Derek Thomas, Deion Sanders, and Steve Atwater. Career turnstile Tony Mandarich was taken number 2 overall, the only top player not to go to the Hall of Fame. The 49ers finished the year with a 14-2 record, which is best in the league. The Giants, Broncos, Rams, Eagles round out the top 5 teams in the league for this season. The wildcard playoffs were underway as the LA Rams traveled to Veterans Stadium to take on the Philadelphia Eagles. Randall Cunningham was human for a day, and the Rams' strong run game advanced them to the next round with a 21-7 victory. In the second wildcard game, Gary Anderson proved that kickers are people too, by hitting a game-winning 50-yard field goal in the Astrodome to advance the Steelers past the Oilers. I mean, how can the Steelers lose being led by a guy by the name of Bobby Brister? I'll tell you how. They faced John Elway. Denver edged by with a 1-point victory after a late Mel Bratton touchdown. Somehow, the Cleveland Browns were actually solid, and they advanced past Jim Kelly and the Buffalo Bills. Touchdowns leader Jim Everett had a solid game and sealed the win in overtime with a 30-yard touchdown pass to Flipper Anderson. What an awesome name. Seriously, names of the 90s were wild by themselves. Finishing out the divisional round was the yearly Minnesota disappointment as the Vikings were thrashed 13-41 by the Niners. The 49ers continued the beatdowns as they wiped the field with the Rams and Candlestick 30-3. In the AFC, Denver and Cleveland faced off in the AFC Championship, and Elway led the game in passing and rushing yards. Browns quarterback Bernie Kosar had a rough game going 19 for 44 with 3 interceptions. Bernies never really win in the end, do they? The answer is no, and neither do the Browns. This brings us to the 49ers Invitational Super Bowl 24, and the only thing super about this game was the nachos and the utter beatdown that the 49ers handed to the Broncos. Joe Montana had 5 touchdowns, Jerry Rice had 3 touchdowns and 148 yards, which means it was just another week for the 49ers. This was their 4th Super Bowl and second to last of their dynasty. Season awards were handed out, and to no one's surprise, Joe Montana was named as league MVP. As dominant as he was, Barry Sanders looked almost as impressive as he won Rookie of the Year and finished just 10 yards short of the rushing title with 90 less attempts than league leader Christian Okoye. The season closed, and as the offseason began, the Dallas Cowboys, who finished 1-15, did not end up with the first pick in the draft. You see, they forfeited this infamous distinction by selecting quarterback Steve Walsh in the previous year's supplemental draft. This move was somewhat redeemed when they traded Walsh to the Saints for multiple high-round picks over the next 2 years. Atlanta traded the pick to the Colts, who selected a legendary quarterback that would carry the franchise for years to come. We're talking about Jeff George, of course. 6 Hall of Famers were selected in this draft, including the best undrafted player ever, John Randall, perennial league rushing leader, Emmitt Smith, and everyone's favorite uncle, Shannon Sharpe. The 1990 season was one that finished with a lot more parity than the average year. 5 teams finished with 12 or more wins, with the 49ers once again leading the league with 14 wins. Among many records set by Joe Montana, Derek Thomas, and Jerry Rice, one major award was handed out to this season's Coach of the Year, Jimmy Johnson. This change of direction for Dallas would shape the future of the NFL in the 1990s. Now we go over to the NHL, where admittedly I'm kind of a dummy when it comes to hockey, but the Bruins, Sabres, and Flames finished with the best records in the league at the close of the 1989-90 season. This season was the end of a few eras, but none more iconic than the final run of the full fiberglass mask. What is now more widely known as face of the Friday the 13th franchise's killer Jason Voorhees, the fiberglass mask was the go-to face protection for NHL goalies for years. This transition started in the early 80s after a horrific eye injury to Bernie Parent, resulting in his career being cut short. Bernie's had the worst luck, man. Sam St. Laurent apparently didn't get the memo as he became the last player to wear the mask, appearing with it in 14 games throughout the season. As one run ends, another begins, as this season will mark the last time the Red Wings would miss the playoffs until the 2017 season. All three New York City teams made the playoffs this season, and with all this talk about the playoffs, let's get over to the bracket. Although they were the best regular season team, the Bruins were taken to a full 7 games before finally getting past the very game Hartford Whalers. What a cool name. The Canadiens upset the Sabres in 6 games to set up a matchup against Boston in the divisional finals. The Rangers made quick work of the Islanders to face the Capitals, where they eventually lost in 5 games to get us to the Prince of Wales Conference Finals. Fans waited in anticipation to watch the underdog 7th seed Capitals face off against top-seeded Bruins. Unfortunately, those fans didn't have to wait long because the series was going to be over pretty quick. Mog, or Moog, however you say it, and the Melons stifled opponents with elite goaltending, proven by winning the William M. Jennings Trophy. On the other half of the bracket, the top-seeded Calgary Flame were dropped in 6 games by the GOAT Wayne Gretzky and the Los Angeles Kings, another major underdog as they were the last seed in their conference. The Blackhawks survived back-to-back 7-game series where they waited for the winner of the Kings and Oilers. This matchup pitted Gretzky against his former team, who ended up getting the better of him, sweeping the Kings 4-0. Edmonton advanced through the conference finals to set up a matchup with the Boston Bruins. The best team of the league proved to be no match for league MVP Mark Messier and the perennial powerhouse who won 4 of the last 6 Stanley Cups. It just goes to prove how valuable experience goes in a sport like hockey. It's almost as valuable as mouthguards and dentists. Not everything was perfect for the Oilers this year though, and what was one of the strangest team drafts in the history of sports, the Edmonton Oilers did not have a single one of their 11 players selected play an NHL game. That's misfortune only a Bernie could achieve. One team that made the right choice was the Pittsburgh Penguins as they picked up veteran and future Hall of Famer Brian Trottier to pair with the top 5 pick Jaromir Jagr. Now we move on to America's sport, baseball. In typical baseball fashion, this season started off with a lockout. The basic agreement between the players and owners was set to expire, and in the midst of coming to a new agreement, the owners proposed a new revenue-sharing plan that would go toward paying player salaries, which would be based on a pay-for-performance scale. Among other things, a salary cap would be placed. The owners claimed the average salary would increase 20% by 1993. The Player Association feared the salary cap would restrict choices in free agency and would eliminate multi-year contracts. After roughly a month, both sides came to an agreement and the minimum salary was raised by over 30%. 1990 was an intense year for pitching. On the 3rd day of the season, Angels pitcher Mark Langston's and Mike Witt combined for a no-hitter. 2 months later, pitching legend Randy Johnson, who was traded the previous year for Langston, pitched the Mariners' first ever no-hitter. With the precision and aim of a stormtrooper, Tigers hitters failed to get a single hit. Just 9 days after that, another pitching legend, Nolan Ryan, at age 43, throws the 6th no-hitter of his career. And in case you thought that was the end of the pitching insanity, you got another thing coming. 3 weeks later, A's pitcher Mike Stewart also threw a no-hitter. He was worried earlier in the day after having a poor warm-up, and the game started and he took the mound, slowly building momentum. Around the 5th inning, he knew it would be a long game for the other team. As Stewart was closing his no-hit bid, former teammate Fernando Valenzuela watched in the Dodgers video room at the close of the game and said, "You saw one on TV, now you're going to see one in person." What a boss. They should have named him Fernando Nostradamus because he proceeded to mow down every Cardinals batter. Sorry, Caitlin. Originally, 9 no-hitters were thrown in this year, but only 7 are officially recognized in the record books. Multiple errors in the 8th inning cost Yankees pitcher Andy Hawkins as he threw 8 no-hit innings, yet still lost to the White Sox 4-0. Shortly after, Hawkins started another game against the White Sox, but oh how the tables were turned. This time it was the White Sox turn as Melita Perez pitched 7 innings before rain delay. That's right, they also took away his. Terry Mulholland added to the total as he pitched a no-hitter against the Giants at Veterans Stadium. What was particularly impressive about this game is Veterans Stadium was a place known to be favorable to hitters. And in our final and possibly most unlikely no-hit game, Blue Jays pitcher Dave Stieb finally achieved his accomplishment after having 3 previous attempts lost with 2 outs in the 9th inning. Talk about coming up short. Am I right, guys? This just goes to show how unpredictable pitching was in 1990. NL batting leader Willie McGee was traded late in the season to the A's, but because he had enough plate appearances, he won the batting champion award for a conference he was no longer in. Speaking of hitting, Cecil Fielder came back from Japan a new man, and with a more consistent swing, became the first batter in 13 years to hit 50 home runs. At the close of the season, the Athletics finished with an impressive 103 wins. Boston, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati all won their divisions and made their leagues' respective championship series. Boston and Oakland wasn't much of a series, as MVP Rickey Henderson and Cy Young winner Bob Welch swept the Red Sox to advance to the World Series. Things were a little less lopsided on the NL side, where the Pirates and Reds battled to 6 games, where Cincinnati eventually advanced. At this point, the Athletics were like the 2017 Warriors. A stacked team with the best player, one of the best pitchers, the hitting leader, and a championship pedigree. What they weren't prepared for was pitcher Jose Rio and manager Lou Piniella, who was able to motivate his players more than a Marine chasing the last copter out of Nam. Over the entirety of the World Series, the Athletics were only able to combine for 8 total runs. The key play came in Game 2 with the game tied in extra innings. Joe Oliver hit a single to left field to drive in what would be the game-winning run. The Reds swept the A's in one of the most shocking series ever. In the midst of the celebration, Reds outfielder Eric Davis is making his way to some treatment at the hospital. You see, during the game, Eric dove for a fly ball. In the process of trying to make a play, he ruptured his kidney. This injury not only kept him from celebrating with his team, but took several years for him to fully recover. 1990 was quite possibly one of the craziest years in baseball, especially for pitchers. College football in 1990 started like any other season, but would end in controversy. This wouldn't be the wild world of sports if it didn't, am I right? The Miami Hurricanes started alone atop the AP poll, but this would come with some contention. Miami, Notre Dame, Auburn, Florida State, and Colorado all received at least 3 first-place votes in the preseason poll. Their season didn't have the start that they planned, as they lost in Week 2 to BYU, led by eventual Heisman Trophy winner Ty Detmer. They lost the second game and dropped to the 4th spot where they would finish the season. Just like every year, bowl games were selected, and this is where it gets crazy. Who would finish as number 1? Well, it would be none other than the powerhouse known as Colorado. We ended the year with Colorado, Georgia Tech, Texas, Miami, and Notre Dame rounding out the top 5. The top 2 teams had 1 loss and 0 losses respectively. Due to Colorado's unusually difficult schedule, they were awarded the top spot. Organizers of the Orange Bowl invited at the time top-ranked Notre Dame to play Colorado. Their hope was that this would be the top 2 ranked teams facing off, but Notre Dame lost their next game, thus resulting in a drop to number 5 in the rankings. The Sugar Bowl said hold my beer and invited Virginia to the game. Virginia thanked them by losing all their remaining games and finished unranked. The SEC champion Florida was barred from bowl participation due to sanctions, so number 10 Tennessee took their place in the Sugar Bowl. The Big Ten finished in a 4-way tie for their conference. The committee looked past 2 bad losses and awarded the Rose Bowl bid to Iowa, since they did beat the other 3 teams. The Cotton Bowl was the most normal matchup of this list, as number 3 and number 4 Texas and Miami faced off against each other. This brings us to the Fiesta Bowl, where political upheaval and the state of Arizona brought concerns of a potential boycott. They eventually settled for 18 Louisville facing 25 Alabama. This meant that Georgia Tech will be facing 19 Nebraska in the Citrus Bowl. Are you confused yet? Because I know I am. Here's how the championship would be decided. Miami repeats if both Colorado and Georgia Tech lost, and Miami wins. Notre Dame wins the championship if they beat Nebraska and Colorado loses. Colorado wins the championship if they beat Notre Dame. This is all sounding like those stats that they give to you at the end of the NFL season to see who makes the playoffs. Miami destroyed Texas, but Georgia Tech winning their game ended their long-shot hopes of a title. This brings us to the top 5 matchup with Colorado and Notre Dame. This game was tight all the way as neither team got much going offensively. With roughly a minute left, Notre Dame punt returner Rocket Ismail blasted off. See what I did there?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
And took the punt over 90 yards for a touchdown. This appeared to seal the game, but ref's gonna ref, and the play was called back for a clipping penalty. Notre Dame's Hail Mary was intercepted as the game ended with a score of 10-9, the difference being a blocked extra point. An extra point that would have set the Notre Dame school record for most consecutive extra points. Poor Craig Hentrich. This win gave Colorado their first and only national championship. Now it's time to check in with the basketball side of the NCAA. The UNLV Running Rebels started the season at number 1 in the preseason polls, and with good reason. This team was absolutely stacked. Led by future NBA star Larry Johnson, UNLV had multiple elite scorers along with a very solid bench. The combination of athleticism, size, skill, and depth made them more difficult to beat than a Las Vegas casino. One major change that came this year was the format for the top 25. Well, at the time, the AP only had a top 20, but expanded this year to include an additional 5 teams, a rule that stands till this day. Just like every year, the season concluded and March Madness was underway. A list of notable upsets were made this year, including 14 seed UNI beating 3 seed Missouri, 8 seed North Carolina advancing to the Sweet 16. Sound familiar? The 11 seed Loyola Marymount making a run to the Elite 8. This last one was particularly special as Loyola rallied to make a run following the death of star player Hank Gathers. In his junior year, Hank became only the second player in history to lead the nation in scoring and rebounding in the same season. To put into perspective how talented he was, the most legendary performance came in a nationally televised game against Shaquille O'Neal at the LSU Tigers. Gathers totaled 48 points and 13 rebounds while being guarded by both O'Neal and Roberts, both future first-round picks. After collapsing late in a 1989 game against UC Santa Barbara, Gathers was found to have had an abnormal heartbeat. He was prescribed medicine and continued to play. His cardiologist asked him to come in for testing after the WCC tournament. In the semifinal game against Portland, Gathers scored on an alley-oop and shortly after got in position for a full-court press. He collapsed a few feet in front of point guard Eric Spoelstra. Gathers tried to get up, but shortly after stopped breathing. At 6:55 that evening, Gathers was pronounced dead at just 23 years old. To honor his fallen friend and teammate, Bo Kimball decided to shoot his first free throw of every game left-handed. Gathers was not a natural free throw shooter and used his left hand to improve his shooting percentage. Kimball finished a perfect 3 for 3 on left-handed free throws. The legend of this Loyola team lives on in lore of NCAA tournament history and is one of the best Cinderella runs ever. What wasn't a Cinderella run, though, was the teams that met in the championship. Both the Duke Blue Devils and UNLV Runnin' Rebels were among the favorites to win the tournament. And what is becoming a trend, this highly anticipated championship game really wasn't much of a game at all. Led by the ultimate Chad Christian Laettner, Duke got off to a pretty slow start behind a series of turnovers. UNLV took advantage of these turnovers by converting them into fast break points. The run continued as Greg Anthony scored at the buzzer to end the half. A pair of Larry Johnson threes and more turnovers from the Duke Chads led to another run, resulting in the largest margin of victory in national championship history. UNLV completed its run, and just as it started the season atop the poll, it also finished the season atop the poll. And as always my favorite part, one shining moment played as viewers watched the historic win. Just like the NFL, we're going to go back to the previous year to get a little bit more context to the NBA in 1990. And a major change that would shape NBA broadcasting for years to come, the NBA on CBS ended after a run of 17 years. It was followed by the NBA on NBC and the best sports theme ever. Doesn't that just give you the chills? With the new broadcast partnership settled, this season began with major championship aspirations for a few teams. The Pistons were coming off a second straight finals appearance and their first ever championship over Magic Johnson and the Los Angeles Lakers. Johnson was MVP in '89 and looked to continue a run of dominance that had the Lakers appear at 8 of the previous 10 finals. Before we get to the playoffs, there are a few key performances to recognize this season, the first of which takes us down to Phoenix, where we have a strange but really good Suns team led by 6'10" power forward Tom Chambers. Chambers was known as the first unrestricted free agent signee in NBA history, but added another accolade to his record when he faced his former team. Tom was bothered by the Supersonics' treatment of him, and he felt he was taken for granted. So he took this game as an opportunity to exact some revenge on his former team. Chambers was a bucket, already putting out a 56-point game earlier in the season and also multiple 40-point games. Tom was locked in and tallied 60 points without attempting a single three-pointer. He held the Suns' record for most points in a game until 27 years later Devin Booker broke his record with a 70-point game. Not to be outdone, Karl Malone had a revenge game of his own. Malone was well known as the mailman, and you know why? Because he always delivered. Well, except for in the NBA Finals. Anyways, Malone was bothered by a snub on the All-Star starting lineup. As how many of these games go, the Lakers had such a hold on the league that All-Star voters voted in AC Green into the starting lineup. Having won the previous year's All-Star Game MVP, Malone contemplated not even playing in the game. He decided to show up to Miami, but decided not to play because of an injury. The Bucks wished that Malone had an injury as they were getting taken to the woodshed by Malone, as he made 82% of his shots and tallied 61 points in only 33 minutes. They won the game by 48 points, and to make things better for Malone, AC Green missed all 3 of his attempts in the All-Star game and was the only player in the All-Star game to finish with a whopping 0 points. You know who never scored 0 points? Michael Jordan. In another classic matchup, the Bulls faced the Cavs as they were in the process of solidifying another playoff berth. The way Jordan treated Cleveland, you would have thought they would have smacked his mother. Actually, they cheered Jordan, but not because they liked him. According to Jordan himself, the reason why he went crazy this game was due to Cavs fans cheering a potential injury after a particularly hard hit by Hot Rod John Williams. He felt they would rather win at the expense of the players' health, so he paid them back in the only way he knew how. In a ridiculously efficient night, Jordan scored 69 points and sealed the win in overtime. As the season wrapped up, the Eastern Conference was led by the Pistons, Bulls, and Sixers. The Western Conference had the Lakers again, along with the Blazers and Spurs. In a major turnaround, the Spurs drastically improved their win total led by rookie David Robinson. The major upset of the playoffs came when the Phoenix Suns beat the Lakers for the first time ever in the playoffs. This ended an 8-year run of the Lakers making the Western Conference Finals. On the other side of the bracket, the Bulls and Pistons had another epic battle that went to 7 games. Ultimately, the Pistons won this battle, but would end up losing this war with Jordan and the Bulls. As noted in The Last Dance, one of the best sports documentaries ever, Jordan said that he cried on the team bus because he was devastated about coming up a game short of reaching the finals. His father, James, came on the bus and told him to forget about the loss and gear up for next season, which turned out to be one for the history books. A very solid Trailblazers team led by Clyde Drexler advanced to the finals for the first time in 13 years to face the bad boy Pistons. In Game 1, the Blazers led by double digits late in the game and looked to steal one on the road. After a timeout, Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars mounted a comeback that finalized as Thomas hit a dagger with under 2 minutes to go to give the Pistons the win. In Game 2, the Pistons held a 3-point lead with under a minute to go. Isaiah Thomas looked to clinch the game but missed a layup. Terry Porter tied the game with 10 seconds left, but once again, the Blazers fought back and took the lead as Isaiah Thomas fouled out. Dwayne Beer apparently had the clutch gene, as he had a 3-pointer to take the lead with 4 seconds to go. And what do you do when the game is on the line? You give the ball to your best player. Drexler was fouled by Rodman, who had been playing on a sore ankle with 2 seconds left. Drexler made both shots to seal the win. Rodman would miss Game 3, but it wouldn't matter as the Pistons dominated after a solid performance from Vinnie Johnson and Joe Dumars. In a sad turn of events, Dumars' wife used a courtside phone to inform Joe that his father had passed. While declining press interviews, he did decide that he would play the next game. The hot shooting from the game before escaped the Pistons early in Game 4. Portland took the lead, but Dumars and Johnson found their touch from the game before and battled back. That combined with stifling defense led to a halftime lead for the Pistons. Isaiah Thomas took over after halftime and scored 22 points in the third quarter to take a 16-point lead. Buck Williams blew an opportunity to tie the game from the free throw line but was bailed out by Clyde Drexler as they regained possession. He sank both free throws to give them the lead. Thomas then hit a jump shot to take the lead back, and with 9 seconds left, Portland drove to the basket but was sealed off by Dumars. Thomas picked up the loose ball and took off for the other end. Channeling his inner Chris Paul, he chucked the ball towards the basket from over 50 feet away as he was getting fouled. Incredibly, the shot went in. But ref's gonna ref, again, and they didn't count the basket. After trading free throws, Gerald Henderson made a wide open layup to give Detroit another 3-point lead. Portland got the ball with 1.3 seconds to go, but because this is the wild world of sports, we end up getting what is possibly the craziest ending in any NBA Finals game. Danny Young received a pass at half court, took 2 dribbles, and hoisted a shot that perfectly swished to tie the game. Players from both teams came onto the court arguing both ways. Obviously, Blazers players and coaches signaled to count the basket, while the Pistons were arguing the shot was too late. Veteran referee Earl Strom, who was calling his final NBA game, huddled the officials together who finally came to the decision that the shot was in fact too late. The Blazers battled through Game 5 as they fought to keep the series going. They led the game late until everyone's favorite cousin Vinny led the Pistons to a 9-0 run. His last shot was the most clutch of the series. With the game tied at 90 with 20 seconds to go, Isaiah Thomas drove and tried to open up a shot for himself. He kicked it out to Johnson, who took 2 dribbles, nearly falls, then hits a game-winning shot over some really good defense by Jerome Kersey. The Pistons win their second championship, both back-to-back, with Isaiah Thomas winning Finals MVP. This marked the Pistons' last championship before their miracle run of 2004. As the season closed, Magic Johnson was awarded the league's MVP. This was the third and final time he would win this illustrious award. This year marked the end of an era as Pat Riley resigned as Lakers head coach. There were a few key offseason additions too, as the Lakers added Sam Perkins and the Mavericks signed Alex English. The Glove, Gary Payton, headlined this year's draft class, taken second overall to the Seattle Supersonics. Man, nicknames used to be a lot cooler than they are now. Quite possibly the most underrated move of this offseason was a second-round selection in the draft. As part of the new wave of European talent coming overseas, Chicago took forward Tony Kukoc with the 29th pick overall. This selection, while not providing an immediate impact, would prove invaluable in the years to come with the Bulls dynasty. Adding on to everything we have learned so far, Mike Tyson suffered possibly the biggest upset in boxing history as Buster Douglas beat Tyson via knockout in 10 rounds to win the heavyweight title, and West Germany won the 14th World Cup a few months before being reunified with East Germany. We made it to the end, and just like any good sports league, we're going to finish with our awards. The Kevin Durant UTA MVP award goes to none other than Joe Montana. Along with winning the NFL MVP and multiple Player of the Year awards, he led his team through one of the most dominant playoff runs we've ever seen. The Karen Participation Trophy goes to AC Green of the Los Angeles Lakers for his 0-point performance in the All-Star game. And that's it! The world of sports had multiple historic events in 1990. Consider subscribing, and join us next week as we dive into the 2016 NBA Finals. Again, I'm Lucas Larson, and you just learned about the wild world of sports in 1990.